Well, thanks everybody for coming down. We would like to talk a little bit about some movement both in the final negotiations as we are approaching the end of session, as well as potentially a major shift with the negotiations with regards to the capital infrastructure and Vikings Stadium bills potentially. We have been working with us House and Senate caucuses together to try to find some solutions to address the governor's priorities of the session, which are a Viking Stadium and a bonding bill, as well as the Republican priorities of reform, of tax reform, and also of trying to reduce the overall size and scope of the government. When we're looking at this particular proposal, what we have done is had a major shift from looking at it as a broad stadium discussion to one of infrastructure and moving to this as a piece of a broad infrastructure plan across the state. It looks very specifically at the costs of the stadium project that relate to infrastructure and paying for that within the bonding bill potentially of a statewide capital investment plan focusing on infrastructure. So we would be combining that within this. There is no racino, there is no casino, there is no gambling in this proposal, there is no additional revenue in this proposal as we are discussing it. We will pay for this the way we pay for all infrastructure through the Capital Investment Committee. We see this as part of an overall strategy to find a solution that addresses the needs of Minnesotans. So that is the broad concept that we have been working on and over the past couple of weeks, and also in dealing with many of the issues that specific legislators have with the existing proposals. Primarily the overall cost of the project, to bring that down, and also to address issues with the funding mechanisms associated with the project. We have consensus between the House and the Senate Republicans on moving forward with a concept with that. Senator?
Thank you. Including public infrastructure for the Vikings Stadium into our bonding bill makes such perfect sense. And frankly, this is not a new idea. It's been discussed in several of our committees, and we, of course, in the legislature are working as we see bills progress through committees, and this one has had hours and hours, over 30 hours of hearings in the Senate. We're looking at all these different proposals, and I commend Representative Dean and the House for bringing forward yet another good legislative proposal. I'm surprised that there's been such an overreaction from the governor of the legislature doing our work. This is what the legislature does. And so we've pulled together from ideas that have been proposed by other legislators here at the state capitol. I think Senator Rosen and Representative Lanning have considered this. I know Representative Winkler has, Representative Marquardt has. So what we're doing is moving forward on another alternative, which is to include Vikings bonding in our general obligation bonding bill. And the advantages to doing that are pretty clear. Number one, it reduces the overall cost for the project. The cost of the interest rates goes down if you're using general obligation bonds as opposed to revenue bonds. We're bonding for public infrastructure, which is what the state does. This would be a public building, and so we would be working on all the foundational costs, utilities, sewer lines, roads and bridges. That's what state government does. And the added benefit is that we have taken out all gambling expansion, no increased revenues. I think that's a huge advantage. I think that that's going to bring a lot of support among our caucus members. It's a pretty straightforward way to do it. So I think this is leadership. I commend Representative Dean for bringing this forward. We're getting a lot of strong support and momentum building in the Senate Republican caucus for this proposal.
You guys taking up the votes with the current plan? You repeatedly said there's no gambling expansion in this, or why aren't you taking up the current plan that the Vikings and Maury Lanning and Julie Rosen and the governor agreed to, the plan that moved through committee and has been going for several months?
Well, I think if you went back over time and listened to the hearings or were watching, you would see that there were lots of concerns raised by many members of the legislature, and this is in recognition of those growing concerns about the proposal that was advancing.
Can you go over some of the detail? Is this still a $975 million plan with the $400 million from the state coming from bonding rather than pull tabs? Or what differences are we talking about?
The primary difference is that we're trying to simplify the entire discussion from one of infrastructure only, and we are capping and delineating the state participation in this to infrastructure. So the question would be, what are the infrastructure costs associated with that? How do we define those within a bonding plan? And we're basically saying everything from the turf down is infrastructure, and that would be what would be considered that bondable for this particular project. It's infrastructure only. The Vikings will be working with other stakeholders in determining what the stadium looks like. I think that that's another particular issue that has come up, is that the state probably doesn't need to be in the business of designing these things or delineating what that is. So it just caps our investment at infrastructure, and that's what the state participation is. What are you going to pay for? Infrastructure. How are you going to pay for it? The same way we pay for infrastructure across the state, and we will include this with a plan for infrastructure across the state, and it's capped. It says that that's what the state participation is on this project, and it doesn't really address the overall project size of the project with the Vikings in great detail.
So what's the number you're talking about for infrastructure only?
Well, what we have, we've been asking for information with regards to that to address exactly what's within that and what's outside of that, and also comparing that to other projects of like size and completed, so that we're addressing that. It's probably in the 20 to 25% of total construction costs with site costs and infrastructure. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Would you pay for any of the actual stadium, just infrastructure around it? I'm confused because Senator Ortman just said the stadium would be a publicly owned building. So are you saying you won't pay for any of the actual building?
The state contribution within the bonding bill, as we're discussing it currently, would be infrastructure. Obviously, in any bonded project, it needs to be a government-owned property. That, in terms of bonding, we have to do that. And we're just saying that our participation is capped at infrastructure, at the infrastructure costs. And that's something that I think people can understand. It's a really honest way to pay for this, the way we pay for other things. The average person can get their head around it and understand it and agree with it or disagree with it, but it's a pretty honest proposal.
What's considered infrastructure? It sounds like you haven't defined what infrastructure is in this case.
Well, I think that if you look at turf down, that's a good way to think about it as to start off for the average guy to think about it. There's a lot of costs associated with this, just as there are with other public building projects that we support with bonded infrastructure dollars across the state of Minnesota. So transportation costs, site costs, heating costs to the site, a lot of site work. It adds up to generally 20 to 25% of projects like this size, and those are some of the discussions that we are going to have and some of the information that we're gathering right now.
I have an offer sheet here that says it's $300 million that was given to the Vikings. Is it $300 million that the state's on the hook for? Why can't you just answer whether it's $300 million or not?
Well, because we're not going to negotiate at this point. We're trying to say what we're going to pay for with this proposal. I think we have pretty broad consensus within a statewide infrastructure bill that we would be willing to discuss that. And we're kind of we're at the point where we're gathering information about what would be inside and what would not be inside that, but I don't care to negotiate that at this time.
And on that, I just want to say we want to make sure that this is a good deal for Minnesotans. And that's why we're maybe taking a different approach, a different look at what's being proposed, as opposed to negotiating with them. Let's start with what we're willing to do for them on the part of Minnesotans.
So what are you envisioning in terms of the overall bonding numbers? So are you looking at something like 496 plus this 200 roughly?
Well, with respect to the numbers for the stadium, there's a pretty big range still being discussed, and that's still true with respect to the overall bonding number. That's what's being discussed.
Is this potentially the plan, or is this the plan? Mr. Majority Leader, you kept using the word potentially. Is this the GOP plan going forward, or are you just exploring it?
Well, I think we have pretty broad consensus from our caucuses that this is a path forward. We're looking for solutions at this point. and this has the broadest support. We're very excited about the opportunity of, number one, capping the state's share into infrastructure and including that in a statewide infrastructure bill. That's something we have very broad support for. Also simplifying it in terms of what we're paying for and how we're paying for it. It's a very good discussion we've just had with our caucuses, and I think it's been very fruitful.
Chairman House specifically, Mr. Majority, if I could follow up, Chairman House specifically said a $746 million bonding bill with $250 million to the Vikings was the number the chair has. Is that true?
We're still looking at both of those ideas, both for the infrastructure component of this piece, but also infrastructure across the state of Minnesota on roads and bridges and lots of very much needed infrastructure improvements across the state of Minnesota. So we don't have either of those two delineated at this point, and we will continue to work on those.
Mr. Speaker, there are cynics here at the Capitol who think this whole plan is designed to kill the stadium. You're taking the roof off it. The Vikings say it's too late to change the design and the concept. Is this designed to kill the stadium for this session?
Well, I would never question the motives of my good friend who's also an architect who actually knows a little bit about this stuff. I would never question Senator Senjum or Senator Ortman's motives behind this. Again, it's another solution that actually finds a solution to the problem, which is this doesn't work, that doesn't work. People have issues with this, as Majority Leader said, or as Senator Ortman said, that there's problems in components as you go through this bill. It's another option, and it's not meant. I wouldn't waste. We've said all along we wouldn't waste any of your all's time if it wasn't something that isn't legitimate. Like I said, we discussed it in caucus. There's support for it in caucus, but it isn't unlike when you built the intersection out at 494 and 394. We built that gigantic intersection out there. It cost a lot of money, and then the Carlson Towers came up behind it. It was, to Matt's point, it was below the surface. The buildings came on afterwards. There's been great economic development out there. There's a thing on Rice Street for St. Jude's. I mean, this is traditionally what you would see from a state standpoint. So from that standpoint, it fits hand in glove with what we do traditionally. But I would say that the cynics, they let them talk to themselves.
Speaker, if that is indeed the case, Mr. Speaker, then
Do you support this plan?
Yes, Bill.
thank you, sir. If this is indeed not an effort to blow it up, then you folks are going to send a bill to the governor that violates one of his fundamental principles, which is no state general fund dollars. Now, I understand it's not state general fund dollars directly, but it's a heck of a lot more directly tied to it than anything else that's been used here.
Sure. And again, it's an idea just yet. We're happy to have any kind of input on this, but from a standpoint of, to the other interruptions in Bill's question, this is yet another plan. As I've said all along, before you know what plan actually hits the floor, it's actually too early to say. But in concept, I do think this is a good idea based on how much member support it has. I mean, that's what, at the end of the day, if you're going to have a proposal that isn't going to have member support or you're not going to have members behind it, then it's an interesting proposal, but not something that can pass. I think they have
Could you get any DFL votes for this?
Well, again, I bring forward a copy of an amendment that was in the House Tax Committee on April 14th that had actually $398 million for the Viking Stadium in a bonding proposal and an amendment. So I would assume they're behind it because they offered it as an amendment in the Tax Committee.
Mr. Speaker, why are you, after you've repeatedly said that Democrats need to put up 34 votes, and they said on Saturday, we will do that, and a lot of people have been saying you've been changing the rules of the game, why is this being changed once again? A lot of people are wondering what's going on here.
Well, again, at the end of the day, if the idea is to have a proposal that will actually garner support from a vast majority of members in both caucuses, whether it's half, that's been the standard, fine, if it's my standard, if it's the standard that every other stadium has passed with or has had support for. But from a standpoint of watching the committee processes go forward, looking at what bill was going to come to the floor, and if it didn't have that opportunity to pass, again, the mathematic games around here, counting votes is an art form, and I think some people haven't been very artful lately. So I think you've got to look at what's going to have a chance to pass. This has far more support in our caucus, and from talking to members just in the last few days than some of the other proposals. So that's why, and Representative Dean came and said, "What do we talk about this in caucus?" It's a great idea going forward. Will it get the support of both caucuses and pass off the House floor? That remains to be seen.
So you answer Tom's question? You don't believe John Kriesel and Maury Lanning when they say they have 34 Republican votes on the bill that's being discussed?
I'm not going to question members' motives or their numbers in front of
That's that. I'm asking you whether you have 34 votes on this, because they're telling me that they are. They do have
I'm not going
it.
to question them in front of you all.
Senator Senjum, can you weigh in on this? Do you think this is a good plan? You seem to have been behind the plan that has already passed several committees in your body.
Well, I have. Let me just say this. This is a place of, this is a house of ideas. And day by day, ideas emerge. And today we have a new idea. And we're incubating this thing. I will tell you, we're incubating it within our caucus. And, you know, I think in terms of that incubation, I think we're getting some positive feelings that are certainly emerging. But as we go forward, we'll examine it well. I go back maybe to thinking of some of the committee meetings, you know, the 7-6 votes, all those uncertainty. I will tell you, we're looking for solutions. We want to see if we can make this work. We want certainly the governor to work with us in making this work. I think that's important.
Did you keep him in the dark on this?
We'll get him in the light. Don't worry about that. We'll get him in the light.
Keep him in the dark up until now.
The light will shine.
He's talking about
the light will shine
meetings.
rather quickly.
He's talking about secret meetings and things, and that he was totally kept out of the loop.
No, this idea has merged pretty quickly. This is not one that's, you know, it's been around for a while, but in terms of an idea that we've sort of grabbed onto now and shopped around with our caucus, and it's emerged pretty quickly. But I will tell you, we know that the DFL almost genetically likes bonding. We're able to, frankly, I think, move towards some of this ourselves. And so we're looking towards, I think, an idea that might work. And I think that's the important thing. I think the people of Minnesota, based on our emails, are looking for solutions. Get us a stadium if you can, and then what's the right way. And this may or may not be the right way in the end. But today it's incubating, and we're looking forward to working with it.
Can you clarify, you just said this happened rather quickly. Majority Leader Dean said this has been a matter of weeks. And could you also clarify, would this be paid back from the general fund, which has been a principle around here that stadiums should not be paid for by the general fund?
Well,
how would you pay back these bonds?
There are offsets that we're looking at, and I'm not going to get into the details of the bill. It's far too early. This is very embryonic, and we're, I think, looking at all of those details, but we'll have good offsets with respect to paying back the debt service on this.
What are those? Are they paid back by the general fund or not?
I would speak on that general fund question because I've heard it a couple of questions. It's pretty hard to argue that the proposal that Senator Rosen and Representative Lanning were moving forward did not affect the general fund. In fact, what was happening was the gambling proposals were increasing the state's net receipts on gambling and sending that money through the general fund and then redirecting it. So there was definitely a general fund impact with that proposal. There would be with this as well, but a lot less because we would be including a much smaller purchase price for the overall project. The cost of the general obligation bonds are less than the other bonds that were being proposed, and so you'd have a much smaller impact. And frankly, the general fund currently has budgeted debt service payments for general obligation bonds and bonding bills. And so I think the impact on the general fund in some of these discussions has been overstated, but we are working at that. That's one of the really important points that we'll be discussing with our caucus members.
Madam Chair, so you would say to Minnesotans the proposal as you know it currently would put the general fund at less risk than, say, the electronic pull tabs proposal. You can say that conclusively?
I don't know how risky the pull tabs proposal was, and I wouldn't opine on that, Bill. I don't think that's a very fair question, but I think that this would actually cost less general fund money to pay for the debt service because the project cost is lower. So
I understand that the risk was quite small, and that was testified to in committee. But my question is the risk percentage and factor, albeit small in both cases, is it smaller under this proposal for bonding than under the pull tabs or any of the others that have been looked at?
Well, in my personal opinion, yes. Because it doesn't rely on new revenues or an estimate for those new revenues in order to make the deal happen.
Why come forward with this now? Why come forward with this now? It's the day after you wanted to adjourn. You talk about incubating, but how many days left do you have on your calendar? I mean, what's sort of the path forward for this?
Well, I can just address some of where this kind of came from. It arose out of concerns that many members had with respect to the overall cost of the project, of trying to bring that down to cap the state's investment in this. to my more fiscally conservative way to provide a better deal for the taxpayers that was very clear, no smoke, no mirrors, no nothing else. It was very clear. Also capped at infrastructure. So that idea seemed to kind of have a lot of resonance. And as I just talked with different people and heard the same things in different corners of the caucus, tried to ask some questions about moving forward. Is there a way that we could move forward? And then ask for some information, some technical information and cost information with respect to the project, just to find out if it was possible or doable to move forward. And that's kind of the timeline for how that arose. And we're trying to find solutions. If we yesterday was the day that we would like to have adjourned, and if we had wanted to do so, we certainly could have. But we want to find solutions for the state of Minnesota. We want to be able to provide tax relief for Main Street. We want to provide infrastructure for Main Street and for businesses on those main streets all across the state. We would like to find common ground with the governor. We believe that there's still time to do that, to address not only the governor's priorities of a Vikings stadium and a bonding bill, but our shared priorities of infrastructure improvements across the state, and also improvement for small businesses all across the state of Minnesota, and for the people who work for them and potentially could be if we have a better job picture moving forward. So that's it moving forward.
This idea? When were you going to unveil this idea?
Well, we are just trying to find solutions to move forward. And there just seemed to be a critical mass of members that were very, very interested in trying to find some ways to provide infrastructure for the entire state, and perhaps merging that with the bonding bill, because that's quite frankly our focus within the bonding bill is Main Street infrastructure across the state of Minnesota. So that was the genesis.
So what's the path forward? Do you have a bill tonight, tomorrow, recess for a few days? What's the plan here?
Well, the plan is to put the parameters to this together as quickly as possible and start to fill in some of the variables. What are the exact numbers? What is the dollar amount for debt service? All those, we're going to try and answer those questions for our caucus members first and bring that information back to them.
Is there enough support or close to it to pass this with just Republican votes on both on the floors of both bodies?
Well, this is a bonding bill. I mean, it's going to require 60% from both.
It's not even going to be a separate stadium.
It would be within the structure of our bonding bill.
Is the other Viking stadium plan dead?
Well, I don't support the current stadium plan. I think that was made pretty clear in the tax committee. I think there were others as well that really don't support that plan. What's been interesting for me observing over the last few days is that there are still members trying to find other ways to accomplish this. I've seen members working on user fees. We've been working on that with the Department of Revenue. So you've got 201 legislators really trying to figure out what are the next steps, Tom. And I think...
Did you vote against it in committee?
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Clarify for me what happens above the turf, as you say, Mr. Leader. Is that all up to the Vikings to find funding for that? Just clarify that.
Well, Don, the broad concept is to cap it at our job is to cap our state commitment at infrastructure. And if we need to provide other support in terms of legislation for how other stakeholders might finish the project, the Vikings, the city and others, what they're going to do and how they're going to do that. Obviously, if we're going to provide that infrastructure, we want a commitment of what they're going to do up front, obviously. We want that completed, and we want it to be a successfully completed project. But the idea is to cap the state's investment at infrastructure and to allow the Vikings and other stakeholders to work on moving on top of that infrastructure to complete their project.
And have you got any indication they will commit to anything in this plan? The Vikings will commit to anything?
I believe that they spoke earlier, and you might have asked them for yourself about that, but I think that there's been generally openness to solutions. That we, in the legislature wants to find bills that we can agree to that the governor can sign, and to fulfill our priorities. Our top priority is jobs and in our reform bills, and we really would like to complete those and work with the governor on those.
Do you think a roofless stadium is a good idea? Is a roofless stadium a good idea?
Well, I think that that what the idea is that we're capping the state's investment at infrastructure. If that means that the Vikings lower their costs, that's a decision that they will make. If they would make that to be roof ready, and the Vikings are amenable to that, it's something that they have brought in early in the process, so that would certainly be functional as a Viking stadium. Without that, but also be roof ready, so that if next year or 5 years from now they want to complete that they would be able to do so, and to design that into the project, I think just makes sense.
Would you be
Just so I'm
willing
clear,
to
you're bringing
proceed
this forward
without
as a...
Vikings approval on this? Would you be willing to proceed if they don't agree?
As I said before, we're trying to find what Minnesotans' tolerance will be for a Vikings stadium, and we want to make sure it's a good deal for Minnesotans first before we ask the Vikings. But we are here trying to help, trying to put something together that will work for everyone.
So I'm clear, you think this is a proposal that can win a supermajority in the House and Senate without a roof paid for by the general fund?
I sure hope so. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here, Rachel.
That's something that you believe you can get supermajorities in the House and the Senate when you couldn't for a regular bonding bill in the 4 months of the session so far.
As I said, I think that there's momentum growing behind this in our caucuses. There's a consensus building, but we have some folks with some really good questions that we need to provide answers to before they're going to move forward with this.
Have you talked to Democrats about this or the governor?
Well, I can tell you that that there was opposition to our earlier bonding bill. We had 80 votes. We required 81 votes. We had 11 Democrat votes at that point for restoration of the beautiful Minnesota Capitol building. We were one short. We would have liked to have that extra vote. Then at that time, the opposition was that this was too small of a bonding bill, and it was not comprehensive. This particular one will be statewide infrastructure, and I believe it will receive very much the strong support that our $499 million infrastructure bonding bill last summer received from Democrats to fund projects all across the state of Minnesota. And the building trades in Minnesota is not in a recession, they are in a depression. This would be a statewide infrastructure project to put a lot of those hardworking tradespeople to work immediately, and it would also provide infrastructure at the site for the Viking Stadium that would put many, many folks to work immediately. So these are the priorities of Minnesotans, particularly in the building trades, that typically have very strong support within the Democrat caucus, and I would expect that they would support it. And if not, I would ask for their explanation as to why not.
So the credit card borrowing that you guys have criticized the governor of doing in his bonding bill is now okay? The Porky projects that the governor loaded, credit card borrowing, things that you've lobbed at the governor over the last 3 months.
Projects, if you guys want to fight amongst yourself, or
she's helping me out to try and get you to answer the question.
Well, it is a little warm in here, huh, Tom? The projects that are in the bonding bill that are, whether it be the Southwest Rail Line, whether it be civic centers, whether it be local road and bridge projects that we think are important, but that he did not. I think the local road projects were omitted from one of the proposals. Yeah, those are pork. I think the sculpture garden is fine and is a beautiful place to go and visit. But I don't think that is an infrastructure type of project. The bill that we had last year got 109 or 106 votes, and it was big box things. Roads, bridges, wastewater, flood mitigation, you name it. But it required concrete, steel, and rebar, not paper, not wallpaper, not paint, not an exterior, but it required a lot of heavy equipment use versus the other. So if that's the projects that are in there, I consider those pork. If it is, I voted for the bill last year. Absolutely. And it had over 100 and some votes in the House of Representatives. I don't think I've seen a bonding bill in my time here that received over 100 votes. So that is a project that I can support. But supporting things that are picking winners and losers, whether it be the southern half of the state and leaving the northern half of the state out when it comes to civic centers, I do think that's pork.
Just to be clear, is there, after you do the infrastructure piece, if this work goes through, is there no other state action required on any other of the stadium plan aspects that we've been talking about in committee? the Minneapolis sales taxes, the charter, all that stuff. Is there no other state action that's required, just the infrastructure?
Well, the Minneapolis provisions could be included in our bonding bill, and that's what we're discussing right now, is what would be included in that language. And then there may be, I believe that the discussions that we're having would include the Minneapolis language so that we can authorize the local partnership. I think that's a real key to the success of this proposal, is making sure that it's viable, and that is the test. Folks, we have Senate session at 4:15, and so we are going to have to be done here.
When do you plan to roll this out to the governor formally?
Well, we're still working internally on that, Barry. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.